I never invited my cruel stepfather to my engagement party, but just before the ceremony he stormed in, shouting and furious. In front of 200 guests, he hurled rotten eggs at my face. Humiliated and trembling, I called for my fiancé, then everything in the room changed. My name is Eleanor Carter, I'm 26 years old, and I work as a graphic designer here in Dallas, Texas. Tonight was supposed to be one of the happiest nights of my life. My fiancé, David Miller, and I had planned our engagement party for weeks. We invited about 200 people, friends, family, coworkers, neighbors. Everyone important to us was there. Everyone, except one person I deliberately left off the list, my stepfather, Mark Johnson. Mark is 52, bitter, and unemployed. He has a temper that could set a room on fire. Growing up with him was like walking on broken glass. He controlled everything he could, from the way I spoke to what I wore, and he never missed a chance to remind me that I wasn't good enough. My mother passed away years ago, and after that, it was just me and Mark in the house. He treated me more like a burden than a daughter. By the time I was old enough to move out, I had promised myself I would never let him control me again. That's why when David and I started planning our engagement party, I made a clear decision. Mark would not be invited. I wanted this night to be about love and happiness, not about anger and fear. David supported me without question. He told me, "This is our night, Eleanor. We'll make it about us and the future, not the past." I held on to those words while I slipped into my white dress and looked in the mirror. The venue was perfect. Lights strung across the ceiling, tables lined with flowers, music playing softly in the background. The room filled with laughter, hugs, and the clinking of glasses as our 200 guests arrived. I felt almost weightless as I moved from one group to another, smiling until my cheeks hurt, greeting everyone who had come to share our happiness. "Eleanor, you look beautiful," my friend Anna whispered as she hugged me. "Thank you," I said, glowing from the inside. David stood across the room, greeting some of his colleagues from the police department. Nobody else in the room knew yet that he was a police officer. We had kept that detail private, not because it was a secret, but because we didn't want his job to define the celebration. He caught my eye and gave me a small nod. That nod always calms me, like he's telling me without words, "I'm right here." But just as the ceremony was about to begin, the atmosphere changed in an instant. The doors to the hall slammed open, so hard they rattled on their hinges. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. And there he was, Mark Johnson, my stepfather, storming inside like a thundercloud. I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. He hadn't been invited, and yet here he was, his face twisted with fury, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "How could you do this without me?" he roared, his voice echoing through the hall. Gasps spread among the guests. Some people whispered. Others stared wide-eyed. I could feel 200 eyes shifting between me and Mark, waiting to see what I would do. I took a breath, trying to steady the shaking inside me. My voice came out firmer than I expected. "Mark, you shouldn't be here. I didn't invite you. I don't want you here." His face darkened, almost purple with rage. "You ungrateful girl. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? You think you can just cut me out?" The guests shifted uncomfortably. A woman near the front whispered, "Is that her stepdad?" Someone else murmured, "Why is he so angry?" I clenched my fists. "I want you to leave," I said louder this time, though my heart was racing. "This is my night, not yours." For a second, I thought he might turn around and walk out. But then his anger boiled over into something worse. Before I even understood what he was doing, he reached into a bag he carried and pulled out eggs. Rotten, dirty eggs. He hurled them straight at me. The first one hit my face. The second splattered across my dress. The stench was instant and unbearable. Gasps filled the room, followed by silence, so heavy it felt like the air had disappeared. 200 guests stood frozen in disbelief as the humiliation sank into me like sharp needles. My cheeks burned, not just from the slime, but from the shame. I wiped at my face, my hand trembling. Tears stung my eyes. My perfect dress, my perfect night, ruined in front of everyone. How dare you? I whispered, more to myself than to him. My anger was shaking loose, boiling hotter with every second. Mark stood there, chest heaving, glaring at me like he had won something. "This is what happens when you disrespect me," he spat. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but the weight of the eyes around me held me in place. My voice cracked as I called out, "David." And then, as if the room itself had been waiting, David walked in. The energy shifted in an instant. He moved with calm authority, his presence filling the space. The guests turned to watch him, their silence stretching even deeper. Mark's head whipped around, his expression flickering with confusion as he sized up the man walking toward me. No one else in the room knew that David was a police officer. Mark certainly didn't. And as David stepped up beside me, placing a steady hand on my shoulder, the tension wrapped tighter around us all. "Are you okay?" he asked me quietly, his voice firm but gentle. I nodded, though tears still clung to my lashes. David turned his gaze on Mark, and the air in the room seemed to hold its breath. 200 guests waited, frozen in place, as my fiancé squared his shoulders and prepared to face the man who had humiliated me. And in that moment, I knew something was about to happen that none of us would ever forget. David's hand rested on my shoulder, steady and warm, as though he could transfer his calm into me. My heart was still hammering from a humiliation, the smell of rotten eggs clinging to me, but with him standing there, I felt a flicker of strength return. Mark's eyes narrowed at David, sizing him up. He had no idea who he was or what he was capable of. "And who the hell are you?" Mark barked, his voice echoing through the silent hall. David didn't flinch. "I'm the man who loves Eleanor, and the man who's not going to let you hurt her again." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind that filled the room and left no space for argument. Some of the guests shifted, whispering quietly, but nobody dared to interrupt. 200 people, frozen in shock, their eyes darting between Mark and David. I could almost hear their thoughts. Would this get worse? Or would someone finally stop the madness? Mark scoffed, his face twisted with arrogance. "Hurt her? She's the one who disrespected me. She threw me out of her life. I raised her, and this is how she pays me back." His tone rose, his fists clenching as he took a step closer. I stepped back instinctively, but David didn't move. He stood like a wall between us, his calm demeanor unshaken. "You didn't raise her," David said evenly. "You tormented her. You treated her like a possession instead of a person. Tonight was supposed to be her night, but you made it about yourself." Mark sneered. "You think you know me? You don't. She's mine to deal with, not yours." The words made my stomach churn. I wanted to scream that I wasn't his anything, but my voice caught in my throat. It didn't matter, though, because David spoke for me. "She's not yours," David said, his tone sharper now. "She's her own person, and she chose not to invite you. You should have respected that." Mark laughed bitterly, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. The calm strength in David's voice was unsettling him, though he wouldn't admit it. He pointed a finger at David. "You think standing there makes you a hero? You don't scare me." David tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You should be scared. Not of me, but of what you've done. Throwing eggs at her in front of 200 people, humiliating her like this. You think there won't be consequences." The guests murmured, their whispers growing louder. Someone in the back said, "He's right. That's assault." Another voice added, "This is going too far." Mark's jaw tightened. His bluster faltered for just a second as the weight of the crowd pressed in. But he pushed back with anger, as he always did. "Consequences? What are you going to do? Call the cops? You think anyone cares about some family argument?" David's lips curved into the faintest smile, though his eyes were still hard. "Actually, I am the cops." The words hung in the air like thunder. Gasps rippled through the guests. Heads turned, eyes widened, whispers shot through the room like sparks. Mark froze, his face shifting from confusion to disbelief. "You what?" he stammered. "I'm a police officer," David said, his voice calm but firm. "And right now, I'm looking at a man who assaulted a woman in front of 200 witnesses." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the pounding of my heart. I could see Mark's arrogance faltering, the realization dawning on him that this wasn't just another moment he could control. "You're bluffing," Mark spat, though his voice cracked slightly. "You can't arrest me for this. I'm her stepfather. This is family business." David stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He didn't raise his voice, but every word landed like a hammer. "Family business doesn't give you the right to humiliate, to abuse, or to harm. What you did was a crime, and you're standing in a room full of people who saw it." Mark's face flushed red. He glanced around the room, maybe expecting someone to come to his defense. But no one spoke. 200 guests, all silent, their eyes condemning him. Some shook their heads. Others crossed their arms. The weight of their judgment was pressing on him harder than my words ever could. I stood behind David, wiping at the mess on my dress, trembling but stronger now. For the first time, Mark looked small. His anger was still there, but it was cracking. He realized he had walked into something he couldn't control. "You think you've beaten me?" he growled at David. "You don't know who you're dealing with." David's gaze sharpened.
"No, Mark.
"It's you who doesn't know who you're dealing with. Eleanor isn't the scared little girl you used to push around. She's stronger now. And she's not alone." The words struck something deep inside me. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the truth of it. I wasn't alone anymore. Mark's fists clenched, his breathing rough. For a second, I thought he might lunge at David, but then he glanced at the guests again. Their eyes burned into him. The murmurs grew louder. "He should be ashamed," someone whispered. "This is disgusting," another said. He realized he wasn't winning. For once, the power he always held over me wasn't working. And standing across from him, David wasn't backing down. Mark shook his head, spitting words through clenched teeth. "You'll regret this. Both of you." David stepped closer, his voice low but strong.
"No, Mark.
"The only one who should regret anything is you. And tonight, you've shown everyone exactly who you are." Mark glared, his chest heaving, but his bluster was weakening. He looked around one last time, saw nothing but judgment staring back, and muttered curses under his breath. His anger was still boiling, but his confidence was crumbling. I clutched David's arm, my voice quiet but steady. "Don't let him get away with this." David nodded slightly. "He won't." For the first time in my life, I felt the power shift. The man who had controlled me, belittled me, and humiliated me stood exposed in front of 200 witnesses, and the man I loved stood by my side, unwavering. The night wasn't over, and I knew there was more to come, but in that moment, the balance had changed. Mark backed away a step, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. The suspense in the room was heavy, every guest holding their breath, waiting to see what David would do next. And as the tension stretched so tight it felt like it might snap, I realized this was no longer about humiliation. It was about justice. The room was still buzzing with shock, the whispers of 200 guests weaving through the heavy silence like a current. My heart thudded in my chest as I stood there, the smell of rotten eggs still clinging to my dress, my face burning with humiliation and anger. David was still at my side, his hand steady on my arm, while Mark glared at us with a mix of rage and disbelief. I could see it in Mark's eyes. He wasn't used to being cornered. For years, he had held power over me with nothing more than his temper and his cruel words. He expected fear to silence me, and when I was younger, it always did.
But not now.
Not tonight. David had exposed him in front of everyone, and the crowd's judgment was pressing down on him harder than my own words ever could. Mark's lips curled into a sneer. "So what now, huh? You going to arrest me in front of all these people? Make a big show of it? You think that's going to make her love you more?" His voice cracked slightly, his bravado slipping, though he tried to cover it with a mocking laugh. David didn't move an inch. "This isn't about me. It's about Eleanor. You came here to humiliate her, to remind her of the control you think you still have. But tonight, you lost that control." His words were calm, but they hit with the weight of a hammer. Mark's eyes flicked toward me, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I met his glare head-on, my voice steady as I said, "I'm not scared of you anymore." The guests let out a collective gasp, and for a brief second, the silence broke with a few supportive murmurs. "Good for her," someone whispered near the front. Mark's face twisted with fury. He took a step forward, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You think you can talk to me like that? After everything I gave you? After all those years?" His voice was cracking now, desperation leaking into the anger. David stepped in closer, his body blocking Mark's advance. "Enough," he said firmly. "You're not going to speak to her like that anymore." Mark's breathing was heavy, his chest rising and falling like he was about to explode. His eyes darted around the room, maybe looking for support, but all he found were stares of disapproval. 200 witnesses, all seeing him for exactly who he was. He had no allies here, no one to back up his twisted version of the truth. "Look at them," David said, gesturing to the crowd. 200 people saw what you did. Do you think any of them are on your side?" The whispers grew louder. Some guests crossed their arms, some shook their heads in disgust. A woman near the back said loudly, "Shameful." Another man muttered, "He should be thrown out." Mark's face flushed even deeper. He looked like a cornered animal, pacing slightly, his fists clenching and unclenching. "You think you've humiliated me?" he shouted. "You think this is the end of it? You have no idea what I'm capable of." His words sent a chill through me, but I didn't back down. For the first time, I felt the anger inside me harden into something stronger. I stepped out from behind David, my voice clear and firm. "What you're capable of is hurting people. That's all you've ever done. But tonight it stops." Mark stared at me, stunned, as if he couldn't believe I had spoken to him that way. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time, I saw hesitation flicker across his face. David's hand touched my arm again, grounding me. He spoke low but firm, so the whole room could hear. "Mark, you've crossed a line that you can't come back from. You can leave now, or I can take you out in handcuffs. Your choice." The gasps spread again, rippling through the hall. Guests leaned forward, waiting, the suspense hanging heavy in the air. Mark barked out a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "Handcuffs? You wouldn't dare. Not here. Not in front of everyone." David's voice didn't waver. "Try me." The silence that followed was unbearable. Every eye was locked on them. My breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from the release of years of pent-up anger finally spilling out into the open. Mark glanced around again, his eyes desperate now. He saw only disapproval, disgust, and judgment. No one was on his side. The walls were closing in, and he knew it. "You'll regret this," he muttered again, his voice quieter this time, but still dripping with venom. "No," I said, my voice louder than I thought possible. "I regret letting you have power over me for so long. That ends tonight." The guests erupted into murmurs again, some even nodding, their faces filled with sympathy and support. Mark's face twisted, his anger boiling over, but there was fear underneath it now. He looked at David, then at me, then at the crowd. His fists clenched, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The weight of the room pinned him in place. David took a step forward, his voice firm and final. "This is your last chance, Mark. Walk out of here before I make you leave." The suspense was unbearable. My breath caught as I waited to see what he would do. The guests leaned forward in their seats, every one of them holding their breath. For a moment, Mark just stood there, his face red, his chest heaving, his eyes darting wildly. Then, with a growl of frustration, he turned toward the door. He shoved past a few guests, muttering curses under his breath. But just before he reached the exit, he spun back around, his voice booming across the room. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but you haven't seen the last of me." The door slammed behind him as he stormed out, leaving the room in a stunned silence. I stood there, trembling, covered in the stink of rotten eggs, my dress ruined, but my heart pounding with something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. David wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. "It's over," he whispered, though his eyes stayed fixed on the door, alert, ready, as if he knew it wasn't truly over yet. The guests began to stir, their voices rising, some offering me tissues, others shaking their heads at what they had witnessed. A few clapped softly, as if to encourage me. I took a deep breath, letting their support wash over me, but I knew deep down this wasn't the end. Mark's words echoed in my ears. "This isn't over." And in that moment I realized he was right. Tonight had changed everything, but the fight was far from finished. The hall was still buzzing after Mark stormed out, but the energy had shifted. 200 guests sat in stunned silence, then whispered, then offered words of comfort. Some came forward with napkins and water, trying to clean the mess from my face and dress. Others simply shook their heads, muttering about how shameful Mark's behavior had been. I tried to smile at them, to show I was all right, but my hands were still trembling. David stayed close beside me, his arm around my shoulders, his eyes sharp as he watched the door. He hadn't relaxed, not fully. I could tell he was still expecting Mark to come back. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "I'm fine," I whispered, though the stink of eggs clung to me and the humiliation burned deep. "I just want this night to go on. I don't want him to ruin it." David nodded. "He won't ruin it. Not anymore." We tried to return to the celebration, but the tension lingered. The band played softly, but no one really danced. The guests were still shaken, their eyes flicking toward the door every time it moved. I forced myself to smile, to talk, to thank people for being there, but underneath, my chest was tight. Mark's words replayed in my head. "This isn't over." And then, as if summoned by the thought, the doors banged open again. My stomach dropped. There he was, Mark. His face was twisted with rage, his shirt damp with sweat, his eyes wild. He stormed back into the hall, his voice booming. "You think you can humiliate me in front of all these people? You think you can throw me out like trash?" The guests gasped, some stepping back, others grabbing their bags as if ready to leave. The fear in the room was palpable. I could hear the clinking of glasses as hands shook. David moved instantly, stepping in front of me. His voice was louder this time, sharp with authority. "Mark, that's enough. You need to leave now." Mark's laugh was bitter, almost unhinged. "Leave?
No.
Not until everyone here knows what kind of person she really is. Spoiled, ungrateful, selfish." "Stop it," I shouted, my voice cracking but strong. "You don't get to define me anymore." The room went silent. Even Mark froze, his eyes narrowing as he stared at me. My heart pounded, but I kept going. "You spent years tearing me down, making me feel worthless. But I'm not that little girl anymore. I'm stronger now, and I'm not afraid of you." The guests murmured, some nodding, some even clapping softly. Mark's face turned crimson. "Stronger? You? You're nothing without me." David stepped closer, his voice sharp as steel. "She's everything without you. And you're done here." He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt, holding them up so everyone could see. "Mark Johnson, you're under arrest for assault." The gasps spread like wildfire. Some people stood, craning their necks to see. Others whispered, "He's really a cop." Mark's bravado faltered. He stepped back, his hands raised slightly. "You can't do this. Not here. In front of all these people." "Yes, I can," David said firmly. "They're witnesses. Every single one of them saw what you did." The crowd nodded, voices rising in agreement. "We saw it. It was disgusting. He deserves it." The support filled the room, a wave of strength that pushed against Mark's crumbling arrogance. Mark shook his head, his voice trembling now. "You'll regret this. Both of you." David's tone didn't change. "The only one who should regret anything is you." And with that, he stepped forward, gripping Mark's arm and snapping the cuffs around his wrists. The metallic click echoed through the hall, final and undeniable. The guests erupted into murmurs and applause. Some even cheered. The tension broke, replaced with relief. For the first time all night, I felt like I could breathe. Mark struggled, but it was useless. David held him steady, his authority unshakable. "You're done hurting her," he said quietly so only Mark and I could hear. As David led him toward the door, Mark twisted his head back to glare at me one last time. His eyes burned with hatred, but his power was gone. He was no longer the man who controlled me. He was just a bitter, broken figure in handcuffs. The doors closed behind them, and the room exhaled. I stood there, trembling, but lighter than I had ever felt. The guests gathered around me, offering hugs, kind words, and support. "You were so brave," Anna whispered, squeezing my hand. I looked down at my ruined dress, the stains still visible, but I didn't care.
It was more than a dress now.
It was a symbol of what I had endured and what I had overcome. When David returned, the guests applauded him, but he brushed it off, coming straight to me. He cupped my face gently, wiping away the last traces of tears. "It's over now," he said softly. I leaned into him, my voice steady for the first time all night.
No.
"It's just the beginning." Because tonight wasn't just about an engagement party. It wasn't just about Mark humiliating me or David standing up for me. It was about me finding my voice, standing my ground, and finally breaking free from the grip of someone who had held me down for too long. As I looked around the hall at the 200 guests, I realized they hadn't just witnessed a fight. They had witnessed a turning point in my life. A moment when humiliation was transformed into strength and fear into courage. David held my hand, and together we faced the crowd. The music started again, soft at first, then stronger. People clapped, smiled, even began to dance. Slowly, the celebration returned, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. We had endured the worst, and we had come out stronger. I knew Mark's shadow might linger for a while, but he no longer had power over me. With David by my side, and with my own strength finally uncovered, I was free. And that night, under the lights of the hall, surrounded by friends, family, and love, I embraced the beginning of a future built not on fear, but on justice, courage, and the kind of strength that can never be taken away.